Good afternoon. This is Deborah Thompson, and thank you for attending the Take Your Organization to the Next Level Effective Program Development presentation. I'm excited about this presentation because it's a good sort of mix of a lot of different topics that I've been educating clients about over the last couple of years. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them to me through the chat feature, and I will stay on the line for a few minutes after the presentation is over to answer any questions that you have at the end. I will also make all of the slides available to everyone after the session, along with a newsletter article. It's kind of a reprint of a newsletter article that you may have seen that came along. If you clicked on the invitation for more information, you went to a newsletter article. You'll get a copy of that as well that you can share with others. So what is the goal to today's webinar? These are questions to ask yourself. Are you faced with needing to adapt your products or services to changing demands of customers or funders? Do you want to offer something new and different to capture attention or market share? And do you want to take your organization to the next level? If the answer to that question is yes, tell me a little bit about your current program development approach, because this webinar is about addressing those three things. With your computer, tell me which of the following best describes your program approach. Does your programs or services or products, are they evidence-based with measurement? Which means you're using evidence-based programs and you have an outcomes measurement system in place. Press the second button if you're using evidence-based programs without any type of measurement. Are you doing good practices without measurement or with measurement, or are you doing something else? And if you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about there, please feel free to click I have no idea. Thank you. This is always interesting. We have a mix of evidence-based programs with measurement, some evidence-based without, some good practice with measurement. That's my experience of working with most nonprofit organizations. Some are doing good practice without measurement. And what I found, and actually, after I set this up, I thought to myself, gee, maybe I should have given an option of a mix of things, because I've seen a lot of organizations who use some evidence-based programming and then do some just good practice with outcomes measurement. But one of the things that I find that organizations struggle with is outcomes measurement systems anyway. So it gives me a good idea of what we're dealing with. So what are the objectives of today's sessions? These are the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the challenges associated with facilitating innovation in existing companies. And this applies to both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. We're going to outline a solution to the innovation dilemma based on best practices. And this is best practices in innovation in both private and nonprofit sectors. I'm going to describe the stage gate model of product or program development that can benefit your organization, and then offer some tools to diagnose and move past what I call the immunity to change stuck places. And many organizations have them, so we're going to talk about those things. A little commercial about Strategy Solutions for those of you who are not all that familiar with us. Our company exists to create healthy communities, and we work with private sector organizations, we work with public sector, community and government organizations, we work with nonprofit organizations in the social service sector, because healthy communities are created from the intersection of all of those systems. And we work across sector and help, in some cases, to facilitate collaboration, which is very meaningful. We're also very focused on healthy organizations. And healthy organizations are created at the intersection of strong operations, which means good product development or manufacturing and service delivery, strong finance, which includes access to capital, financial management, and fundraising if you're a nonprofit, and then strong support services, those technical supports that enable an organization to operate, such as marketing, IT, HR, and the other parts of back office operations. We have I call it the planning and evaluation process that we use. And most projects that we get involved in, regardless of the type of scope, are answering these 5 questions. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? How are you going to get there? Who's going to do what? And how are you doing? And it generally sets up a process to look at those things. And in recent years, we've been acting, a lot of people think of Strategy Solutions as a consulting firm or as a consultant that you hire to do a special project. But more and more, we have become what I have labeled here as gap-filling staff. We can be an extension of technical or professional staff where it's necessary. We often act as strategic advisors or facilitators, such as for a planning process. And we also do a lot of work as capacity building trainers. Jackie Catcherbone and I are both trained consultants and trainers and peer reviewers for the Pennsylvania Standards for Excellence in Nonprofit Ethics and Accountability. I'm also a trainer and consultant and peer reviewer for the national standards. So we actually spend a lot of time incorporating those best practices and teaching folks how to meet the standards as part of our work with them on an ongoing basis. And when we work with clients, it doesn't really matter what kind of project we're doing. Our approach is to help build the bridge from strategy to execution. If people could just envision what they wanted to do and then sort of go out and get things done on their own, they wouldn't be calling us and we wouldn't be having this conversation. And what we do when we work with people is we help to assess that gap between where they are and where they want to be. And if the gaps have something to do with planning or market research or outcomes measurement or management or any of the gaps that we have competency to fill, we'll actually help fill those during the course of the project so that you can actually achieve outcomes that you need. And then we'll align the organization from top to bottom, which means we create consensus and agreement and support behind strategic directions and initiatives. And that's the way we look at things. So that's a good segue into the challenges with facilitating innovation, because we've had lots of experience trying to help people do new stuff as part of strategic planning initiatives. And these are the questions that I challenge people to ask themselves when they evaluate their own strategic work. Does your company have one or more goals or initiatives that didn't get accomplished? I've seen organizations sort of keep the same goals and objectives from year to year to year. I saw one organization develop, 2 or 3 strategic plans where they kept the same objective on there. Well, why wasn't it getting done? They weren't really evaluating what was working and what wasn't working. And we've incorporated that evaluation mechanism into our planning processes because we're finding more and more that's really important. So do you have stuff that isn't getting done? Are you or others frustrated because you can't get to certain things? Or you hear those words, we can't afford it? Or are you or others frustrated because you never seem to deal with the elephant in the room? All of that happens. My next question is, how would you rate your organization on the implementation of your strategic goals and objectives over the last few years? Press the first button if you say, what plan? We don't have a plan. Press number 2 if you're having trouble and the plan's sitting on a shelf. Press the third button if you've implemented some of it, and the fourth button if you've implemented most of it, and the last one if you've implemented all of it. Where's my results? There's my results. This is really great, okay? Because, and the individuals who say they have implemented all of their strategic plan objectives, I'd love to hear from you at the end of the session about what are the things that you found to be critical success factors, because it's rare It's usually a small percentage, and it's rare that I have folks that say, yeah, we got it all done. Most people say they implemented most. Some, and again, some people say some. And if I'm in a large group of 50 or 75 people, I'll have a couple that say that they're having trouble, that the plan is sitting on the shelf. And what we've been trying to do is what's the difference between those organizations that implement some or most and those organizations that implement most or all? So I'm going to give you some things to think about in terms of diagnosing your own organization. Now, why do plans fail? One of my favorite reasons is that the plan says you're going to write a plan. The plan should have the plan, not say that you're going to write a plan. So it's always a red flag to me when an organization has an objective that says to develop a fundraising plan. If they're creating a strategic plan, the fundraising plan should be those strategies that they're going to raise the money that they need to implement the plan or to implement new initiatives that they don't have dollars for. That's always a red flag to me. And here's the general reasons, based on our experience, why initiatives don't get done in organizations. A lack of understanding of what it takes to get to the next level. The implementation plan itself is unrealistic or it's non-existent. Some people write goals and objectives that are brainstorming, essentially, and they're not really those things that it's going to take to get to the next level. Investment, return on investment, and impact aren't quantified, or there's no strong case for support articulated, so fundraising is hard to do or it's non-existent. We sometimes have a lack of buy-in and alignment of board and staff and funders and stakeholders. That's sometimes an issue. Sometimes, I mentioned before that part of the issue is that people don't really understand what it takes to get to the next level. The places where I see people really struggle on the organizational life cycle curve is what I have here labeled 2, 4, 6. And in some cases 5. 2 and 4 are particularly problematic phases, and by the time they get to me, they're usually at what's labeled 3 and 6 here. They're struggling to get to that next level. They're trying to get from adolescence to more maturity or from startup into adolescence, and they start to decline before they get to that next level. So we frequently see those organizations that have declined a little bit because they're struggling because they haven't figured out how to get to that next level. Or they're at the 6 or at the 5 where they're sustaining, but they say, I want to do something to take it to the next level, but I don't really know how to get there. And what we found is that the planning process to get to the next level, if you're in one of those what I'll call major transition spaces, is actually quite challenging to do, because not only do you have to articulate your vision, you have to articulate and include the infrastructure support that you need to grow the organization beyond that next level, and you have to put that in the plan. And that's, in today's funding environment and today's economic environment, that's really hard to do, and it's hard to fund. So that is what keeps organizations stuck. Blaming one or more individuals for a lack of performance without recognizing the root cause systems that are impacting performance, I call that the beating up the weakest link. Especially in smaller organizations where there's small teams of people, somebody seems to get the blame for things that don't get done. And more often than not, it's a lack of capacity and technical skill or the capability that really keeps people stuck. And in many cases, that's the two things where I see a lack of skill is in project management, just basic facilitation and project management, and what I call dealing with the naysayers. It's somebody on the board or somebody on the management team has concerns about stuff, and they just rah, 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 and it'll keep a process stuck. And then this is the sort of the culmination of it, the inability to admit that one or more of the above is actually a problem and getting help to work through it. So those are the things that keep people stuck. And I want to talk a little bit about the capacity, because that life cycle curve I showed you is actually based on the work of a guy named Paul Conley, who wrote a book called Navigating the Organization Life Cycle. that I've actually been using as a textbook for an organizational development class that I've taught at Duquesne University for the past 10 years. Because maturity in a nonprofit or any organization has to do with having all 4 of these capacities in place. It has nothing to do with chronological age. There is a correlation between size and capacity, although that's not always the case. Just because an organization's bigger, that doesn't mean it has well-developed capacities in all 4 of these areas: leadership, adaptive, management, and technical. And the place where I see the most difficulty is in the adaptive capacities of the ability to monitor, assess, respond to, and stimulate internal and external changes. And I see that happening because of that lack of project management ability. But all 4 of these capacities need to be in place in order for an organization to continue to grow. The other thing that's happened over the last 5-10 years is that the technical capacities required for sustainability for an organization have grown. My list of technical capacities, when I first started doing training around organizational development and publishing this list, my original list I think had 9 things on it. And what are now the top 6 on here weren't even on this list 5 years ago. So product development planning, outreach and advocacy, managing program operations well, and that should actually say standardizing program operations, sort of like McDonald's. You have to have a structured organization and a structured way of doing your operations in a way that's like a franchise in order for you to be able to grow your organization. Earned income generation, compliance, quality, and then all of the rest that most notable people have. So give me a sense of how equipped is your organization's technical capacity. You know, given that list that I just showed you, would you say that your organization is very equipped, is it somewhat equipped, or is it not equipped? And while you're all voting, I will tell a story that when I do training around collaboration, I talk about one of my clients that was a $475 million organization that didn't have a sustainable business model. And, you know, I asked the question to smaller organizations, if a $475 million organization doesn't have a sustainable business model without uplinking or linking with someone to help them, you know, either generate cash for strategic investment or invest in capital things, who does? Which is really kind of scary. I've got to go back to my results. Here's my results. Our participants today are pretty well equipped, which is great. I find a lot of organizations are in the somewhat equipped category. And oftentimes, if you don't have all of those things in place, it makes it difficult to move to the next level. As I mentioned earlier, the most problematic process and skill gaps I see are, in general, project management. And it isn't often that organizations can't do project management or there isn't somebody on the team that's a good project manager. Oftentimes, it's a lack of role clarification, and Mary Smith isn't designated to be the person that's the project manager for a particular initiative. And given the latitude to herd cats and move resources. In some cases, it's the technical skills related to adaptive capacity, facilitation, primary and secondary market research, data collection, analysis and synthesis, and my favorite financial ones, cost-benefit analysis, pro forma financial analysis, and forecasting, which is those two things, if you include cost-benefit. I see a lot of financial people, including accountants, that don't know how to do financial pro forma analysis and forecasting, which is kind of scary on one level, but oftentimes accountants are doing more analysis after the fact than prospective forecasting. And then new product development, especially as it relates to innovation. So how do you solve that innovation dilemma? The first thing you do is create a vision for a new best practice. And if you're a service organization, it's a new service. Or if you're a product, a manufacturing company or a product-oriented company, it's a new solution to a problem. So you want to create a vision for that new product, whatever it is. You want to follow what's called the stage gate model of product development, which I'm going to explain in a few minutes. You want to appropriately organize your innovation team, even though you don't want to call it that, and I'll explain why later. You want to effectively organize a team to effectively manage your product development. Again, I especially see this in nonprofits, but it happens in for-profit entrepreneurial companies as well. We don't have a good organized process for product development, so it doesn't get done well. And then the last thing is to challenge your immunity to change assumptions, which I will also speak about. So how do you create that vision for a new best practice? First of all, you have to look at what's going on in your industry. What's happening in the industry life cycle? What's happening in the product life cycle? What are the trends? And there's two suggestions here. Read or understand the trade literature. Look at, try to figure out where your products and services are on their own life cycle. You can find information in peer-reviewed journals and trade association publications. If you're a nonprofit, you want to look for those new evidence-based best practices. And there's quite a few websites these days that have lots of programs about evidence-based best practices published, including the Centers for Disease Control and Healthy Communities Institute websites. You can also conduct best practice or benchmarking interviews. Talk to people in similar organizations that do similar things that aren't necessarily competitors of yours in some other space. Find out what they're doing. And then determine how you might one-up that latest innovation. Take that good mousetrap and say, what can I do to make it better? And create that vision. Then you want to follow the stage gate model of product development. And what that is essentially a process that takes a product or a service through these various screens. The ideation process, the preliminary investigation process, a detailed investigation process, a development process, a testing and validation, and then full operations and launch. And what makes this process unique is that at the end of every phase, you should stop and say, do I have enough information? Do I have enough validation of what I'm thinking about to move forward? Or does it look like this is going to be a loser? Is this a winner or a loser? And if it looks like it's going to be a loser, stop. If it looks like it's going to be a winner, keep going. So you don't take something to a full business plan if you've got the wrong model. It helps you do it earlier. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute. But because in order to do this well, you have to organize a team to actually achieve innovation. And I'm going to suggest to you, if you haven't read it already, to read the book, How Stella Saved the Farm. The book is downloadable from Amazon, or Barnes & Noble for $10. It is a book that will take you an hour to read if you're a fast reader, an hour and a half to read if you're a slow reader. Stella is a sheep. You can see a picture of her holding up a picture of a llama. No, actually it's an alpaca. Stella is holding up a picture of an alpaca. And the book is a great book because it will help you wrap your head around why innovation doesn't work in my organization. And through this fabled story of the sheep named Stella, you'll be able to put names on people that you work with and say, oh, gee, that's the bull in my organization, or that's the maverick in my organization, and here's why things aren't getting done. And if you have any places that haven't been effective, you want to assess the capacity and capability of your individuals and teams, identify and fill those competency gaps, and define roles, including that of the dedicated team. And why is that? There's plenty of literature out there that suggests that innovation can't happen in existing organizations. There's two schools of thought on it. You have, and the slides I'm about to show actually come out of the Dartmouth School of Thought. The two guys that wrote this book called The Other Side of Innovation, and who also wrote the book How Stella Saved the Farm, believe that innovation can happen inside organizations if the innovation is organized properly. There's another school of thought that says innovation, disruptive technology, can really only happen outside of the organization structure. And there are some theorists that suggest that if you're really going to do substantive disruptive innovation, that you have to create a separate organization that will essentially cannibalize your current business until you get enough momentum behind that new curve. I'm actually a believer that organizations can figure out how to organize innovation, but you have to really think about how you organize your innovation, because you can't ask the group that's in charge of today to also be in charge of tomorrow, because the urgent is always going to squeeze out the important. Getting those important, not urgent things done is the hardest thing in the world for an existing organization. So how do you think about it? Well, first of all, you realize that you have your team that does your existing business. The authors call it the performance engine. And the performance engine is designed to do what it does. Your organization is designed to do what it does, to deliver the products and services you currently do. And what the authors espouse is that you should create a new team that is dedicated to the new initiative. That could be one person, it could be a half a person, it could be somebody outside of the organization, it doesn't matter. But you should create a partnership between this dedicated team and the shared staff that are part of the performance engine, and have them work together to achieve this new innovation initiative. And how do you do it? Well, first of all, you divide the labor. Decide how responsibilities for executing the initiative are split between the dedicated team and the shared staff. You want to assemble the dedicated team. Who's going to be on it? What are going to be their roles and responsibilities? And then work on managing the partnership. Establish clear expectations for each partner and mediate the conflicts that arise between the two. You also then want to create one project plan for everybody that includes the routine tasks that the shared staff does to support the process, as well as the things that the non-routine tasks that the dedicated team will do as part of the partnership. And, one of the processes is to really get this done well, is to get the blessing of the supervisors, of the people that are involved in the shared staff, so that they actually make the work to support the innovation initiative a high priority. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I've worked in large organizations before, or even in small organizations, where you need Mary Smith to do this thing to support the process, but Mary Smith is busy working on her day job doing what her boss said to do. Even though she's supposed to help out this collaborative thing over here, somehow she doesn't seem to have time to do it because it's never a priority because she's busy doing something else. So you've got to get that process established so that the shared staff actually does it. You also have to recognize, I actually had a conversation the other day with somebody in a hospital system about getting dedicated resources. And one of the issues in a lot of organizations, and particularly in hospitals these days, is that new initiatives need information technology staff associated with them. And in some cases, it's difficult to get already busy IT staff dedicated to a new initiative if there aren't extra resources for it. So in this particular case, one of the reasons why this project was so successful is that they actually got some grant funding to hire some additional resources so that somebody internally with the expertise they needed could be reallocated off their current projects. In other words, they backfilled a person's time so that they could be part of the shared staff to support a new initiative. really important. Divided attentions is another challenge. I have to do my day job, plus I'm supposed to do this extra stuff. And then disharmony in the partnership. It sometimes is difficult to work with people in new ways, even if they know each other. If they're working together in a new way, they have to go through the team building process again. And sometimes performance engine limitations include depth. You're asking people to do things they've never done before. Power balance or operating rhythm. They just, haven't worked together and have a good work process flow together. So here's the best way to do that role clarification. The shared staff can take on tasks that are aligned with the performance engine skills and work relationships. In other words, things that they know how to do, let them do it. The dedicated team should handle everything else. New stuff, things you're not sure people have the right skills for. And calling the dedicated team the innovation team undermines the partnership. Even though I label it an innovation team, calling it that actually often creates animosity in an organization that you don't want to have. You're better off calling them the new initiative team or a project team or something. You have to think very differently about planning, and you want to build a partnership that's custom built for the initiative. In other words, you have a project plan that's very well spelled out and everybody agrees to, including the roles that different people are going to have to play at different parts in the process, because you're going to need to negotiate with the decision makers of everyone's time to make sure that the time is dedicated to a particular task when it's needed. And the thing that the authors have found is the performance engine can't simultaneously sustain excellence in ongoing operations and execute innovation that's outside of its narrow confines of specialization. And if it tries, it will often fail at both. So how do you assemble that dedicated team? Identify the skills that you need, hire the best people that you can find, and match the organization's model to the dedicated team's job. Some of the common traps are having a bias for insiders. In some cases, bringing on new people or contracting with someone to provide that support is a good idea. Adopting formal definitions of roles and responsibilities. The new little upstart venture of an established organization can't follow the HR rules of 120 days to post a new job, okay? Reinforcing performance engine power centers. If you read the book, How Stella Saved the Farm, you can't let Bull run the shop where the new venture is concerned. You want to assessing performance of the new thing based on established metrics. New ventures need new metrics. Failing to create a distinct culture for the innovation, using existing processes, and succumbing to the tyranny of conformance. I've seen organizations really expect new ventures to conform to everything that the parent organization has done, and it just doesn't work because they need to be innovative. So to build an effective team, you want to create a custom-based organization model just for that initiative. And outside hires can play a dedicated role, and you want to challenge people to create the right kinds of relationships. And then you want to create new and unfamiliar titles, write new job descriptions, and actually create a counterculture. It should define its own culture, processes, and metrics. And the support functions have to be willing to make exceptions to standard policies to support that new venture. So there's some coordination that needs to be done with it. And you want the leader to take a positive, persuasive, and collaborative approach in their interactions with everybody in the organization. And you have to remember this, the best innovation leaders need help from above. Conflicts are frequent, and you have to have a mechanism for conflict management. And, this brings to mind some of the federal grants I've seen recently that relate to collaboration are requiring a conflict resolution component be put in it because of the need to resolve conflict is so important. So you want to be able to build that mechanism into the process. Everyone has to create and tend to the health of the partnership, moderating tensions and conflicts. Conflicts over formally allocated resources are bound to happen. Interpersonal persuasion is often insufficient to get the shared staff working on the things that are important. So in other words, you've got to have a mechanism to get leadership attention to issues that need to be addressed. And maintaining that healthy partnership is critically important. So once you get the process set up and you have a team established, now you can think about that stage gate process of product development or program development. And here's the 6 phases, and each one of them has a gate in between. Ideation, preliminary investigation, detailed investigation, development, testing and validation, and full operation and market launch. And one of the things I found, especially in smaller organizations that don't have a strong business planning or due diligence vetting process, is that organizations will skip some of these steps and then wonder why their venture fails. And if you follow the process, it really helps create success for the venture. The first thing is, how is it done? Environmental scanning and needs assessment, initial screening, some market analysis, some operations research, looking at funding, and shepherding the launch. And we've had clients that have organized teams to work on new ventures that as part of their work is to get things up and operational and then select and turn it over to an administrator and a team that will keep running it and then go on to the next one. So what is stage 1? Stage 1 is the ideation process. Look at business opportunities. Look at potential partners, including strategic alliances of nonprofit organizations and or other corporate partners. One of the most successful joint ventures that I've ever seen is a joint venture between a nonprofit and a for-profit corporation that brought capabilities that the nonprofit didn't have. And it enabled them to grow into about a $12.5 million business. It was actually a social enterprise of a nonprofit over about an 8-year period. Remarkable growth. So you want to think about partners. You identify and prioritize those opportunities. Look at those things that might be done. Identify the existing evidence and best practices. And, what's your vision to one-up it? You should do a little bit of research at this point. You need to do some preliminary investigation and conduct a high-level feasibility test. Think about, just in general, what would it cost to do it? What's the cost benefit? What do people think about the ideas? And eliminate those with low revenue potential and excessive cost or that would be difficult. And then once you think that something has passed an initial screen, you want to conduct some market research. Talk to people who might actually be users of the product or service. Who are the target markets? What are the size and growth trends in the markets? Potentially, what would these markets pay for the goods or services offered? Actually concept test your ideas and see what people's reactions are to them. Look at the competition. What are their strengths and weaknesses? And if you're a nonprofit, you want to create a concept paper, a one-pager, and test the ideas with donors and funders. We've done stakeholder interviews as part of strategic planning processes where we had one organization that did 14 one-page white papers about their new program development ideas and sent them out to funders and stakeholders. That was the most we've ever done. Most organizations have a couple. But people read them, and they would give us feedback and say, boy, this is a great idea. Contact us to think about this when they're ready to go with it. And they'll go, oh, they could do this, but they need a partner to do it with because they really don't have the competency. Or, no, I don't really see this organization doing that. Tell them not to do it. Interesting feedback. Clients or customers will tell you the same thing. They'll tell you what they like, what they don't like. You can actually do price sensitivity research. Do that market research up front and find out what people think. Then you go into the feasibility phase. If it looks like it's going to go, it passes the initial test, now you start to look at organizational capacity and structure. What skills are needed for management, industry expertise, public relations? Are these skills available from the present staff, or do they need to be contracted or hired? And here's an interesting way. Look at collaborations. Potential profit and financing needs. What's the startup capital and the cash flow required? Where's the break even? I've seen people start new programs without ever looking at a break-even. How will the venture affect public image? Is it consistent with the mission? Are there other benefits other than the revenue it generates? What are things that make it feasible or not? Look at the operations. You need to have a detailed operations plan. How's it going to work? Who's going to do what? What's it really cost to do it? What's the cost to take a client through a process? What's the cost, the fully allocated cost, including all the direct and indirect expenses to actually do this thing or make this product? And create an operations model so that you actually have a production system developed for the new thing. Then you start to look at the structure and the financing. And you should begin to, at this point, explore possible sources of financing during the planning phase. And then you should actually conduct a pilot to see if it actually will work. A lot of people don't do pilots before they launch new things. They just go out and launch them. It's probably a good idea to do a pilot. Pilot something somehow. Do a proof of concept test run of a new product. Because if you have a pilot and you do a pilot, you'll have a feasibility study with an economic model. You'll have an operations plan. You'll have a plan for bringing your products and services to market. And those tools can be used to say, okay, does it look like we're going to have this be financially sustainable moving forward? And then during the last stage, you start to look at, okay, what are the barriers that may challenge the startup or the growth of this venture? What will it take to overcome the barriers? What assistance is needed to find resolutions to overcome the barriers? And then look at the final cost benefit. And a lot of organizations skip this process and don't really think through and talk to other people that have done similar things to see what might show up that might hurt your organization's chances for success. And then you go into a full operations and market launch. Evaluate the pilot performance, raise necessary capital, and then implement the business plan. Sounds easy in theory, much more difficult in practice, but it's critical to try to really follow every step. And what we found is that organizations that follow those steps and use good business planning principles organized with that innovation team approach really help the organization take their performance to the next level, because you can grow programs and services. And lastly, if you're going to look at what's it going to take to get to the next level, our last piece of advice is to diagnose and transcend immunity to change. Immunity to change is the stuck place where you have competing commitments. You have your self-improvement goal, but yet you have these other commitments that you can't quite articulate that work against that self-improvement goal and keep you stuck. And you want to challenge those. You want to figure out what the assumptions are that underlie those commitments. And if you challenge them well, you can actually get past them. And organizations often stay stuck because of those commitments that underlie the behavior. And what I've found over the years of looking at this, that some commitments and assumptions are based on fears or conditions that don't actually exist. And I talk about urban legends or best or past practices that have changed. I've seen organizations that say, well, we can't implement this because the state would never let us. Well, meanwhile, if you talk to somebody at the state, the policy changed 8 years ago, but they didn't get the message. Okay, that's one of the examples. I probably have a half a dozen examples that I could talk about in detail with that. Or a practice, some policy did change, so the reason why you did the thing that you did no longer exists, but yet we don't challenge that, okay? That finance person who says, no, we can't do that, is operating under what they believe to be accurate knowledge of policies when it may have changed. They're just not aware of it. Others come from what I'll call self-protective fears, which is individual people making decisions and doing things that ironically create the very outcome that they try to avoid. And I've seen this happen over and over again. Okay? Those self-protective fears are things like, if this fails, I'll look bad, Or if it fails, I'll get fired. Or if it fails, the world will come to an end, okay? And there are actually people, believe it or not, that operate with that level of thinking, and they can't get past the stuck place. So these are the common immunity to change assumptions. So what I'm telling you, if any of these things show up in your organizations on a regular basis, you probably have an immunity to change assumption somewhere, and it's beneficial to you to try to figure out what it is and get past it. Things like, we can't afford it. We've always done it this way. The board will never fill in the blank. They'll never support this. They'll never approve it. They'll never buy it. They'll, blame the board. They're stuck. A funding stream doesn't exist for it. We need to hire staff because we can't trust consultants to manage critical functions. We have to own it. I want to speak to that for a minute because my company and several others of similar kinds of firms that do what I'll call rent-a-department kind of functions, many organizations have trouble, trusting a consultant, which is really sad, okay? Because in some cases, and I have lots of evidence of this, of different projects I've done in different places, but my favorite example is IT. A lot of people think that they're cool if they have a good crackerjack IT person, but the competencies that any one IT person needs to have are deep and varied. And more often than not, one IT person is not going to be able to understand or do all the things that an organization really needs, but yet they're reluctant to outsource IT to a function that is going to give them a better product and in some cases save them money. But there's a lot of fear around that because people think they have to own it. And in many cases, sometimes individuals, I've seen it happen in human resources. I've seen it happen in planning and outcomes measurement, compliance. Internal people just don't have the training, the expertise, the real skill set, the technical skill set at the level is really needed. And there's lots of opportunities for organizations to collaborate, to get that, and to leverage existing resources across multiple organizations, and it doesn't happen nearly enough. Another one is the administrator responsible for current programs must facilitate their own program development. I've seen really, really good administrators not be able to facilitate a new thing out of, they couldn't find their way out of a paper bag when it came to doing a new thing. But they could do their current job very, very well. So you really have to watch for, various assumptions there. And then accounting and finance staff can do financial projections. I could go on, but those are the ones I see that are common in organizations. So what are some of the strategies to overcome these immunities? One is to create a yes but decision-making option for your board and leadership team. And vet legitimate concerns and don't allow them to stop a process. I've seen that happen in lots of organizations, which is why it's helpful to say, yeah, that's a good idea, but what about this? And really be thoughtful and open about vetting concerns. Makes all the difference in the world. Ask why. People say ask why 5 times to get to the root of it. Well, sometimes why doesn't actually give you the decision-making criteria that the person is using. And in order to appropriately challenge assumptions, you have to really get at what are you thinking when you come to that conclusion. And that's a great question to get at the assumptions that underlie behavior, because you can challenge assumptions when you really get at, and especially if the logic that seems logical really doesn't apply anymore. Now you can really start to challenge it. And then challenge the assumption that underlines a concern or a fear. Some are very legitimate, but you say, is this assumption really true? And if it's true, is it always true? And then if it is true, you have to really start to look at what's the worst thing that would or could happen if you do the thing that you were going to do anyway. Because in many cases, the sky is not going to fall if you challenge an assumption. It's, the world's not going to come to an end if you move forward and somebody has ruffled feathers. it will make all the difference in the world. And it will help you get past your stuck place if you really think through it and work on it effectively. So, what do you do to take your organization to the next level? First of all, you recognize your challenges and stuck places. Try to figure it out. Is it the lack of capacity, lack of competency, lack of process, or all of the above? Invest in an innovation function. Look at who are the dedicated teams in the shared staff process to actually create an innovation. Because if you have somebody that's a good project manager and that can project manage it, and you get the agreement that the various roles are important and that they should support a process, you will make innovation happen in your organization in a way that will astound you. Follow the stage gate product development process. It will save you time and eventually money and failures if you go in a stepwise fashion. And then if you identify and overcome any time you're stuck, and you can find that immunity to change or those assumptions that keep you stuck, your organization will be able to develop the programs and services that you wish you could, and it really will help your organization go to the next level. And with that, I will stop and ask if there's any questions or comments. And I will unmute the line.
The conference has been unmuted.
Any questions that anyone has that wants to throw out verbally? I do have one question that I received via the chat feature that I will share, and because it was okay to leave it for the end, that I will share and answer. And the question is this. Can you give an example of this process working in an organization? And give us some specifics about what the process was and outcomes. And I will share an example. We've had numerous clients, from small to large ones, that we've helped sort of organize into an innovation model. But one of my favorite examples is an organization called the Children's Institute in Pittsburgh. A few years ago, we helped the organization put together a strategic plan. And I mentioned I had one client that did like 14 white papers. It was the Children's Institute. They had us do a number of different concept papers, and they did an extensive needs assessment process over 13 or 14 counties because they're pretty large. But what was interesting about that process is that they organized themselves into an innovation, into that kind of innovation model. They hired some dedicated staff in their marketing department to actually do data analytics and to do some of the market research involved to support their business planning. And they used the information and the feedback that we got from funders during that stakeholder interview process to actually hone in on specific programs to implement. And they tweaked some of their programs based on the support from the funders and the input from the funders. And we're able to launch a $12 million capital campaign as a result of that planning effort. And this time around, 3 years later, we gave them some technical assistance and some feedback on how they were doing their needs assessment process internally, and facilitated one meeting using the option finder, and they've got like every other base covered with their planning process. So it was really gratifying to hear that they not only did they organize themselves well, they have been sustaining that implementation process. And I have an example. I have the article from one of their recent newsletters that I can send out with the handout materials, so you can see that as a kind of as an example of how the process works. Because they've done a good job of implementing the process. They've also had some pretty substantive outcomes over the last 3 years to, kind of talk about as a result of that. So with that, any other questions? Everyone's always so shy about asking questions. Thoughts, questions? All right then. I'm going to thank you for your participation this afternoon. I am going to stop the recording.